There was a time when every kitchen shelf held a familiar red cookbook, and inside it lived recipes that quietly shaped everyday life across America. The name Betty Crocker wasn't just a brand, it was a trusted voice guiding families through meals, celebrations, and hard times. But somewhere along the way, many of those recipes disappeared. Forgotten, replaced, or simply left behind. Tonight, we're opening that old cookbook again, uncovering 10 lost dishes that once filled homes with warmth. Some may surprise you. Some may feel strangely familiar. And one might just bring back a memory you didn't expect. The first forgotten recipe takes us back to a time when convenience met creativity in a way that feels almost unimaginable today. It was called the 7-layer dinner, a dish that quietly appeared in mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks and quickly became a weeknight staple for busy families. At first glance, it seemed simple, just layers of ground beef, sliced potatoes, onions, rice, and canned vegetables, all stacked neatly in a single baking dish. But what made it special wasn't just the ingredients. It was the feeling it carried. In the 1950s and 60s, meals like this reflected a changing America. Families were growing, schedules were tightening, and the idea of a one-dish meal felt almost revolutionary. Mothers could prepare everything in advance, slide it into the oven, and let time do the rest. As it baked, the layers slowly blended together, creating a rich, comforting aroma that filled the entire house. There was something deeply reassuring about the way this dish came together. Each layer held its place, yet by the end, they formed a single, unified meal, soft, savory, and quietly satisfying. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to impress guests. It was meant to feed a family, to bring everyone to the table after a long day. Over time, however, recipes like the 7-layer dinner began to fade. As fresh ingredients replaced canned goods and cooking trends shifted toward speed or sophistication, this slow-baked classic was left behind. But in its simplicity lies a story, one of practicality, warmth, and a generation that found comfort in meals that asked for very little, yet gave so much in return. The second forgotten recipe carries a name that once sounded modern, even a little exciting: tunnel of fudge cake. First introduced through a Betty Crocker baking contest in the 1960s, this dessert quickly became a sensation. It wasn't just a cake, it was an experience. From the outside, it looked like a simple bundt cake, but inside, hidden beneath its firm crust, was a rich, flowing center of chocolate that felt almost magical the first time it was sliced. At a time when home baking was evolving, this cake represented something new. It relied on boxed cake mixes, instant pudding, and clever shortcuts, ingredients that were becoming symbols of progress in American kitchens. Families didn't just bake it for taste, they baked it for the surprise. That moment when a knife cut through the center and revealed the soft, molten core was enough to draw everyone closer to the table. There was also a sense of pride attached to it. Despite its convenience-based ingredients, the final result felt impressive, almost professional. It often appeared at potlucks, birthdays, and church gatherings, where it would quietly steal attention from more traditional desserts. But like many recipes of its era, the tunnel of fudge cake began to disappear. Changes in ingredient formulations, especially the discontinuation of certain baking mixes, made it harder to recreate the original texture. Over time, it was replaced by newer, simpler desserts that didn't rely on such precise combinations. Still, the memory of that first slice remains. A cake that looked ordinary, yet held something unexpected inside, a reminder of a time when even dessert carried a sense of discovery, and every bite felt like uncovering a small, delicious secret. The third forgotten recipe feels almost like a quiet experiment from another era, something both practical and strangely inventive. It was known as perfection salad, a shimmering, molded dish that appeared in early to mid-century editions of Betty Crocker cookbooks. Made with gelatin, shredded cabbage, carrots, and sometimes green peppers, it blurred the line between salad and centerpiece in a way that now feels almost surreal. At the time, gelatin-based dishes were a symbol of elegance and modernity. Refrigeration was becoming more common, and cooks were eager to show what could be done with this new convenience. A dish like perfection salad wasn't just served, it was presented. Carefully unmolded onto a plate, it held its shape with a glossy finish, catching the light and drawing attention before anyone even took a bite. The flavor was crisp and slightly tangy, often balanced with a touch of vinegar or lemon. It offered something refreshing, especially alongside heavier meals. But more than that, it reflected a cultural moment when appearance mattered just as much as taste. Meals were becoming visual experiences, and dishes like this turned everyday ingredients into something that felt almost artistic. Over time, however, tastes began to change. The appeal of gelatin salads faded as fresh, simpler preparations took their place. What once felt innovative started to feel unusual, even outdated, to newer generations. Yet there's something fascinating about recipes like perfection salad. They remind us of a period when cooking was about exploration, when even a humble vegetable dish could be transformed into something unexpected. It may not return to modern tables often, but its story lingers, a quiet reflection of creativity shaped by the tools and tastes of its time. The fourth forgotten recipe brings us into a world where dinner was expected to feel just a little bit elegant, even on an ordinary evening. It was called chicken divan, a creamy, layered casserole that found its way into countless homes through Betty Crocker cookbooks during the 1950s and 60s. Though its roots traced back to a New York restaurant, it was the home kitchen version that truly made it a classic. At its heart, chicken divan was simple, tender pieces of chicken arranged over broccoli, all covered in a rich, velvety sauce made from cream, cheese, and often a hint of sherry. It was then baked until bubbling, with a golden top that promised comfort in every bite. But what made it special wasn't just the flavor. It was how it transformed everyday ingredients into something that felt refined. For many families, this dish represented a step toward sophistication. Serving chicken divan felt like bringing a restaurant experience into the home. It appeared at dinner parties, Sunday meals, and special occasions where presentation mattered just as much as taste. The creamy sauce, the neatly arranged layers, it all suggested care, effort, and a desire to impress. Yet as decades passed, dishes like this began to fade. Rich casseroles gave way to lighter meals, and the time it took to prepare layered recipes no longer fit into changing routines. What was once seen as elegant started to feel heavy, even old-fashioned. Still, chicken divan holds onto its place in memory. It reminds us of a time when meals were meant to feel special, when a simple dinner could carry a sense of occasion. And in that quiet richness, it tells a story of changing tastes, shifting priorities, and the meals that once made everyday life feel just a little more grand. The fifth forgotten recipe feels like something pulled straight from a church basement table or a handwritten family card, passed quietly from one generation to the next. It was known as impossible pie, a clever creation that gained popularity through Betty Crocker during the 1970s. The name alone carried a sense of mystery. How could a pie be impossible? What made it remarkable was its simplicity. Everything went into one bowl: eggs, milk, sugar, flour, butter, and was poured into a single dish without a crust. As it baked, something unexpected happened. The mixture separated on its own, forming a soft base, a creamy center, and a lightly golden top. It created the illusion of layers without any extra effort, leaving many first-time bakers quietly amazed. At a time when convenience was becoming essential in the kitchen, recipes like this felt almost magical. Busy households didn't always have time for traditional baking techniques, and impossible pie offered a shortcut without sacrificing the feeling of homemade comfort. It was often served warm, sometimes with a dusting of sugar or a hint of coconut, filling kitchens with a gentle sweetness that lingered long after dessert was finished. But as baking trends evolved, this simple pie began to fade from memory. New desserts, more visually striking and complex, slowly replaced it. The quiet charm of a self-forming pie no longer captured the same attention. Even so, there's something enduring about impossible pie. It represents a time when small kitchen miracles mattered, when a single dish could surprise an entire family. And perhaps that's why it still feels special, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary ingredients can create something quietly unforgettable. The sixth forgotten recipe feels like a snapshot of a time when salads weren't always light and desserts weren't always sweet. It was known as frosted ribbon loaf, a striking, layered creation that appeared in mid-century Betty Crocker collections. At first glance, it looked almost like a cake, carefully stacked layers with a smooth, frosted exterior, but inside, it revealed something entirely unexpected. Each slice showed off colorful layers made from a blend of cream cheese, gelatin, and finely chopped vegetables or meats. Some versions included olives, ham, or even seafood, creating a savory profile that contrasted with its dessert-like appearance. It was chilled until firm, then sliced neatly, turning every serving into a conversation piece. In its time, this dish represented creativity and presentation. Entertaining at home was an event, and hosts often searched for recipes that would surprise their guests. The frosted ribbon loaf did exactly that. It wasn't just about taste, it was about curiosity. Guests would pause, unsure of what they were about to eat, intrigued by its colorful layers and polished look. The texture was smooth and cool, with each layer offering a slightly different flavor. It wasn't a casual dish, it was something prepared with intention, often reserved for gatherings where making an impression mattered. As years passed, however, recipes like this began to disappear. Changing tastes favored simpler, more familiar combinations, and the idea of a savory, frosted loaf started to feel unusual. What once symbolized creativity gradually became a relic of a different culinary mindset. Still, the frosted ribbon loaf remains fascinating. It captures a moment when cooking pushed boundaries, when presentation could challenge expectations, and when even the most unexpected combinations were welcomed at the table. The seventh forgotten recipe takes us into the world of comfort food that doubled as a showpiece: upside-down meatloaf. A curious twist on a classic, this dish appeared in mid-century Betty Crocker cookbooks and promised to reinvent a humble family favorite. At first glance, it looked like a simple baked casserole, but the surprise came when it was flipped onto a plate, glazed vegetables on top, forming a colorful, savory cake that concealed the hearty meatloaf beneath. In the post-war American kitchen, meatloaf was a staple, but home cooks were always looking for ways to elevate it. The upside-down meatloaf provided both practicality and flair. Carrots, peas, or sliced tomatoes were arranged neatly at the bottom of the pan before the meat mixture was added. When baked and inverted, it created an impressive presentation without requiring advanced skills. Families loved it not just for the novelty, but for the balance of flavors. The vegetables caramelized slightly during baking, adding sweetness and moisture to the dense meat, creating a dish that was both visually striking and satisfying to eat. It often appeared at Sunday dinners, where presentation and taste mattered equally. But as culinary trends shifted towards simpler, faster meals, recipes like this slowly faded. The extra steps and careful arrangement began to feel outdated, leaving upside-down meatloaf largely forgotten. Yet its design holds a lesson. Even everyday foods can be transformed into something memorable with a touch of creativity. Today, revisiting this recipe is like opening a time capsule. It reminds us that mid-century cooks valued both ingenuity and heartiness, creating dishes that nourished bodies while captivating eyes, a combination that modern comfort food rarely tries to achieve. The eighth forgotten recipe is a testament to mid-century ingenuity: frozen custard salad, a dessert that once delighted families during warm summer months. Featured in Betty Crocker cookbooks of the 1950s and 60s, it combined the creaminess of custard with the chilled refreshment of gelatin, creating a dish that felt both indulgent and innovative. Unlike typical puddings, this salad was molded, often studded with canned fruit, nuts, or even maraschino cherries, making each slice visually striking. In an era when refrigeration was becoming a household norm, dishes like frozen custard salad were celebrated for their ability to surprise and refresh. Housewives could prepare it in advance, and it would firm up beautifully in the fridge, ready to impress guests without last-minute effort. Children were particularly drawn to it. The creamy custard paired with the subtle wobble of gelatin made eating it an almost playful experience. The flavor profile was delicate yet satisfying. Sweet custard mingled with the slight tartness of fruit, while nuts or coconut added texture. Every bite carried a sense of occasion, as if the dessert itself were a reward for enduring the long summer afternoons. It wasn't just a sweet dish, it was a centerpiece, a conversation starter, and a reflection of the era's fascination with novelty in the kitchen. As time passed, however, recipes like frozen custard salad began to vanish. Changing tastes leaned toward fresher ingredients and simpler desserts, and gelatin-based creations gradually lost favor. Today, the recipe feels almost theatrical, a relic of a time when food could be both a practical dessert and a visual spectacle. Rediscovering frozen custard salad allows us to experience that creativity anew. It reminds us that mid-century kitchens were places of experimentation, where even dessert could surprise, delight, and bring families together around the table with something truly unexpected. The ninth forgotten recipe carries a nostalgic charm that feels almost ceremonial: Ambrosia mold. Once a fixture in Betty Crocker cookbooks, Ambrosia combined canned fruits, shredded coconut, marshmallows, and a light creamy dressing, all set in a gelatin mold. Its presentation was as much a part of the experience as its flavor, a perfectly shaped, wobbly centerpiece that seemed to glow with festive cheer. In the mid-20th century, Ambrosia was more than a salad, it was a statement of hospitality. Families served it at holiday dinners, potlucks, and Sunday gatherings. The bright colors of pineapple, mandarin oranges, and cherries, interspersed with the snowy white of coconut, created an eye-catching dish that promised sweetness and celebration. Children adored it for its candy-like components, while adults appreciated its light, refreshing quality alongside heavier meals. Making ambrosia required patience and care. The gelatin had to set just right, the fruits needed gentle folding to preserve texture, and the final unmolding had to be done with precision to maintain the mold's elegant shape. It was a dish that rewarded attention to detail and rewarded the table with both flavor and spectacle. Over the years, however, ambrosia molds began to vanish from family tables. Newer, faster desserts, and a growing preference for fresh ingredients pushed these gelatin-based creations into obscurity. Yet, the memory of their colorful, sweet layers lingers, an emblem of a time when presentation mattered as much as taste. Reviving ambrosia mold today is like peering into a mid-century dining room. It's a reminder of the care, creativity, and playfulness that once defined home entertaining. Even if it no longer graces modern tables, its story preserves a piece of culinary history that's as joyful as it is forgotten. The 10th forgotten recipe is a quiet, homey treasure that once graced countless mid-century American tables: chopped beef and potato casserole. Featured in Betty Crocker cookbooks of the 1950s and 60s, it was the ultimate example of comfort food that stretched ingredients without sacrificing flavor. Layers of seasoned ground beef, thinly sliced potatoes, and a creamy sauce came together in a single pan, baked until bubbling and golden, creating a hearty meal that fed both body and spirit. What made this dish remarkable was its practicality. In post-war kitchens, families sought ways to maximize nutrition, flavor, and convenience. Casseroles like this provided all three. The ground beef added protein, potatoes offered substance, and the creamy sauce bound everything together. It was simple to prepare yet delivered warmth and satisfaction with every bite. Beyond its ingredients, the casserole reflected a cultural moment. Meals were more than sustenance. They were a daily ritual, a chance for families to gather, share stories, and find comfort in familiarity. Even the act of layering each component carefully before baking carried intention and care, making it a dish that felt personal. Over time, however, such recipes began to fade. As convenience foods evolved and tastes shifted toward lighter fare or single-ingredient dishes, layered casseroles slowly disappeared from common menus. Yet the memory of them endures, hearty, practical, and deeply comforting. Revisiting the chopped beef and potato casserole is like stepping back into a kitchen filled with the smells of home and tradition. It reminds us of an era when meals were thoughtfully prepared, when simple ingredients could create lasting memories, and when comfort wasn't just about flavor, it was about the care poured into every dish. As we close the pages of this forgotten culinary chapter, it's clear that these recipes were more than just meals. They were memories, traditions, and small acts of love passed from one generation to the next. From the surprising richness of the tunnel of fudge cake to the practical warmth of the chopped beef and potato casserole, each dish tells a story of an America that cherished home, family, and creativity in the kitchen. While some may have vanished from modern tables, their flavors, aromas, and the feelings they evoked remain timeless. Rediscovering them is more than cooking. It's reclaiming a piece of history, one recipe at a time.